Hey, well, that was a weird entry, wasn't it? So I'm Dr. Lori O'Malley in the Psychology and Sociology Department, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit, not very much, but a little bit about Chapter 13. There in your Intro to Psych book. There are a couple of things that I wanted to mention from Chapter 13. One talks about the attribution theory, which is really early in this particular chapter. So that theory talks about whether we're holding on to things that or behaviors that we notice about people, and then attribute them to the whole person, and we forget about what might be attributed to the environment or the social situation that they're in. So that's one thing, but there's another part that I don't know that our textbook talks about very much, and it's called the halo or horns effect. And I think that is an easy concept to understand. So it's when you meet a first person, kind of based on your first impression or maybe first and second impression. But the halo effect is when you think you have a really good impression of this person. And so you attribute them to having all of these wonderful characteristics that they may or may not actually have. You don't know them well enough yet, but you start attributing those characteristics to them. And so in Human Sexuality, Psych 3003, we talk about these kind of things as being part of attraction, which is also in Chapter 13 for you guys. But it's the idea that when you go on a first date with someone, or a second date with someone, and they show you all these great traits, exactly what you're looking for in a potential romantic partner. And then we start attributing all these other great things to them. Like, oh, they're so polite, so they must treat their mother so well, or they must get along with their brothers and sisters and coworkers so well, or, all of these things that we think are good things about people based on our first impression. The horns effect is just exactly the opposite. So like if you meet someone and you feel like they're rude or they're dismissive of you, then you're going to attribute all the negative characteristics that you can think of to that person. So in this case, let me talk about the case of dating. Like if you went out with somebody and you went to dinner and they were super rude to the wait staff. Yeah, come on in.
You can leave this open if you wanted to.
Okay.
Now we're through with all this.
Okay, great. That wasn't very noisy at all.
Really?
I didn't think so. No.
Pretty loud.
Oh,
Especially
well,
when I hit the wall. I hit your door.
well, I heard the wall, but I was like, oh, well, okay. I mean, you could hear it, but it wasn't
I
like
mean, also like your
crazy
door was
loud.
closed.
Yeah.
So I mean,
well, that made it a lot better.
yeah.
But yeah, and the water didn't soak up under the door.
The rats are pretty wet though. So
I imagine. Well, when I stepped out there, I was like, oh yeah, that's a lot of liquid right
yeah,
there.
so we have to get the floors really wet for the machine to work.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
So yeah.
Okay.
And I just didn't want y'all's carpets getting wet.
Yeah.
Well,
then that's a whole nother issue. Yeah. No, that's a whole nother issue.
Oh yeah.
Okay, now I think we're back. I got interrupted for a second. Anyway, so this halo and horns effect is kind of an interesting thing. The other thing is talking about, the chapter talks about conformity and non-conformity. And I think that's important. It becomes super important when you're leading into the adolescent phase of your development, and we start thinking about social comparison a lot. And, in elementary school, typically we don't do a whole lot of social comparison. We're just fun and we're just at school. We either love it or we don't love it, whatever. But about middle school age, we start comparing ourselves to others, and like the kinds of shoes people have, the kind of vacations people go on, the kind of how tall you are, how short you are, how muscular you are, how lean you are, all those kind of things we start comparing about adolescence, pre-adolescence. So it's really important during that time phase to pay attention to our kids and make sure that that's not really not let that be a big giant thing in their lives. Gosh, the last thing I wanted to talk about was something that we see all too much in our country now, and it's taken a really pervasive and different turn than in the past, and that's prejudice. This whole us versus them mentality. Now, we know that has existed for a long time, but now more than ever so, our media and our nation and state leaders are kind of pushing this, it's us versus them, and the disparity between our political parties, and basically that we only have a two-party system here. I think we're one of the only countries that does that. But this huge disparity between us and them, whichever side of the fence you're on, and it's really causing a lot more divisiveness than ever before. Yeah, that's not a good thing. So when you start thinking us versus them, try to put yourself in the other person's shoes, try to see them from another perspective. And that way, not only will you have a better understanding of people, but you also will see them as less dysfunctional, right? If you take in their perspective and see how they can understand things from their viewpoint, it doesn't mean you have to adopt their viewpoint. It just means that you can understand why they would feel that way or why they would think that way. And that makes you a more functional person. And that is better for your mental health than just trying to fight all the time. So that's it for chapter 13. We'll move on with something else.